On this day, November 17th, 1810, Sweden declares war on Britain. This was an odd war because no fighting took place. Sweden informed Britain that it wasn't really a war, and the whole thing about joining the continental system, banning British goods, well, they kind of had to do that. Sweden was in a bit of a bind. It had been allied to Britain earlier. In the first coalition it had remained neutral, but eventually ended up on Britain's side. It ended up also in alliance with Russia and Prussia. Prussia, obviously, was occupied, it was defeated, knocked out of the war. Swedish Pomerania, which is a little bit of northern Germany, which is northeast right now, was overrun, and the Swedes had to accept French terms, otherwise they would lose it. Russia, being allied to France after 1808, the Treaty of Tilsit, had joined the continental system and had used it as an excuse to attack Swedish territory in Finland. Up until this time, most of the Baltic had been Swedish. The Russians were able to capture Finland and Åland, a group of islands between Finland and Sweden, and so Sweden had to give that away to Russia. Obviously, we know that a few years later, Russia turned on France as well, but for the moment, it was cooperating and it was making hay while the sun shined. Sweden, stuck between Russia and France and another Napoleonic ally, Denmark, which also ruled Norway at this time. So they were surrounded by enemies, allies of Napoleon. They had to declare war on Britain and pretend to join the continental system. Throughout the conflict, so this conflict officially lasted 2 years, they were officially at war, but they allowed British ships to port at their cities. They allowed them to use their islands. They allowed smuggling, which wasn't really smuggling, it was just trade, full-blown trade, but it was smuggling because they officially weren't trading at all. And Britain was okay with this. Obviously at the time, Britain was involved in the war in Iberia, Spanish War of Independence against Napoleonic French forces, and they couldn't really do much about what Russia was doing. They couldn't really do much on the rest of the continent. Napoleon was very powerful at this point. He hadn't made the reckless decision to go to war with Russia yet, so he was secure, except for his weak point down in Iberia. And so Britain was taking advantage there. They didn't really have much time to deal with what was going on in the Baltic, and they weren't going to be defending Swedish Pomerania. So Sweden told Britain that we're going to declare war, join, quote-unquote, the continental system, but yeah, don't take it seriously and don't attack us. And so there was no conflict. Britain and Sweden didn't fight any battles. There's no conquest, there's no sea battles, and in fact, Britain was using Swedish ports and protecting the Swedish coast from the Danes and the French. In 1812, everything changed. Napoleon invaded Russia, and Russia turned its might and its fury upon French forces and their allies. This gave a lot of countries, a lot of princes, the courage of their convictions, and they came out and declared war once again upon France, and this was the Sixth Coalition. Battle of Leipzig, the Battle of the Nations, and the eventual fall of Napoleon. What was odd, a little bit odd about this whole thing was the ruler of Sweden was a man with the last name of Bernadotte, and he had previously been one of Napoleon's most loyal, most trusted, and most accomplished marshals. So a man who had stood and fought alongside Napoleon had been offered the throne of Sweden. Well, he was offered the crown to be crown prince of Sweden because the old king was dying and he had no issue, and he accepted. He did say to Napoleon, when he accepted, that he would put the interests of his newly adopted country first. It was a warning to Napoleon, and one that he kept, and a promise that he kept. Because when it became obvious, the first thing Bernadotte did was turn against his old friend and master. And he fought alongside the Russians, the Prussians, the Austrians, and everyone else at the Battle of the Nations in Leipzig. Some credit him with being the reason why Napoleon lost so badly. However, this was the real Phony War. A war which began on this day, November the 11th, 1810. If you like these videos, come back for more tomorrow.